So again, here we are in the third week of Lent. We're on Hump Day of the third week of Lent. For those of you who have the traditional Monday through Friday workday, I don't. I'm Sunday through Thursday, but that said, remember we're skipping around. So when we think of what we've been doing, we went from, we went from 2 kings, and that was Naaman the Syrian. And then yesterday, of course, we were in Daniel, where we heard the prayer from Azariah from the fire. And now we're in Deuteronomy. And remember what Deuteronomy is. Remember these words: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's the Torah. Those are the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Christian Bible, first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible as well. And that's the Torah. That is the that would, I guess, a good way to put it. The most important books in the Christian Bible are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The most important books in the Hebrew Scriptures are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Ironically enough, Deuteronomy means 2. It was originally supposed to be the second book. However, it is the 5th, but that's a story for another time. And what we're looking at here is Moses speaking for the Lord. And so what Moses is doing is he's basically preparing the people to go into the promised land. Now, that's actually going to come towards the end of Deuteronomy. But what is he telling them? That they have been given the statutes and ordinances of the Lord, and they are to observe them. And why are they up to observe them? Let's go to the Catholic Public Domain version. You can find this at sacredbible.org, and we're going to look at this. So we will see that the reason why they are to obey these laws is this. The Lord reminds through Moses the people of this fact: there is not any other nation so great which has its God so near to them as our God is present to all our petitions. For what other nation is there so renowned as to have ceremonies and just judgments and the entire law that I will set forth today before your eyes? And so guard yourself and your soul carefully. You should not forget the words that your eyes have seen, and do not let them be cut away from your heart throughout all the days of your life. You shall teach them to your sons and to your grandsons, from the day on which you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when the Lord spoke to me, saying, gather the people to me, so that they may listen to my words and may learn to fear me throughout all time that they are alive on earth, so that they may teach their children. What is the Lord saying here? He's saying here, very simply, the reality is that the people are learning the law of God. The law of God is rooted in the wisdom of God, and because it's rooted in the wisdom of God, these people will live a great wisdom. What is the alternative? The alternative's going on in the pagan communities. And what are they teaching in the pagan communities? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So as you can see, this is one of the things that's going on. Now, I shouldn't be so extreme. You have to realize when I'm talking an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, when I'm talking all that happening, I'm talking about that happening in the time of Moses. I'm not talking about that happening even in the time of David, or for that matter, in the time of Maccabees, although it may be going on, but now we're in the time of Moses. So you're talking roughly about, and this may not be an accurate figure, about 6,000 years ago. So you're talking about 4,000 BC, maybe not quite that far back, but at least somewhere around 2,000 BC anyway. So you're talking some time ago, and you know that whole reality of evolution is real. Again, people who have a problem with evolution, what they actually have a problem with is biological evolution and not any other form of evolution. It is obvious evolution is real, of all different forms. And there is more than biological. There's cultural, there's spiritual, there's intellectual, there's scientific. They're all forms of evolution. When people say, I don't believe in that evolution thing, what they're actually talking about is biological evolution. And they often have it wrong, by the way. That's one of the weird things. Never came from monkeys. Well, actually, evolution teaches that no one comes from monkeys. In case you didn't know that. You need to understand how evolution works to realize that maybe a good example, I guess, would be Planet of the Apes. If you notice the terminology they use, there's human and there's simian, two different lines, and that's true about biological evolution. We don't come from monkeys. That just ain't true. That's true. We don't come from monkeys. It's a whole different lineage, and they're similar but not related. So that's an important thing. But aside from that, it is very clear there are other forms of evolution. The greatest example of this is you can read the Bible and see a whole different understanding over the time of how people live. It goes like that all the time. You see a whole different understanding all the time of how people live over time. A good example of this is what we see in David. What is the one thing I tell you that David is a master of? You never brought David bad news. David was a master of the technique called kill the messenger. Always. You gave him bad news, that was your last day. If you wanted to make it your last day, you just say, let's think of some bad news to give to David. And let's see how David likes it, because he defined the terms, kill the messenger. That's what David did. Today, we wouldn't do that because we have grown a whole new way of thinking. And don't forget something else. Evolution is written in the Bible. Again, if you disagree with evolution from Charles Darwin's theories, what you disagree with is biological evolution, period. I believe in it, but you disagree with biological evolution. It's very clear there are other forms of evolution. When did Jesus come? He came at the fullness of time. That's right in the Bible. What does that mean? When the world came to a point that people would understand who Jesus was when he came to arrive. That's what it is. That's a different form. It's not biological evolution. It's a different form of evolution. This was real, or this is real, that there is some evolution. So we go back to this time of Deuteronomy, and what's happening is the people are learning the wisdom of God, and it is a revelation from God to learn this wisdom, that is powerful, that is deep, that is understanding, that teaches a whole different way of being, and this whole different way of being is revelation from God, so that they are living at a higher standard than everyone else. Remember, right up until the Romans, human sacrifice was common among the pagan communities. It was the Romans that put an end to it, and it was the Spanish who put an end to it in the Americas. It's Spanish and the British, I guess you could say. With all due respect to the Spanish, which were known to be as vicious as they were, they still put an end to human sacrifice. And you have to realize that the Aztecs and the Mayans were sacrificing 1,000 people a day per tribe. The Aztecs were doing it in Mexico City, what was then called Tenochtitlan. I probably mispronounced that. And the Mayans were doing it in their capital city, which I have no idea where that is. That would be, I think, today in modern Guatemala. Fascinating. So they were both sacrificing 1,000 people a day. That's obviously 365,000 people a year between the two of them, which means every 3 years, you're roughly going to 1 million people. That's what they were doing. And it was the Spanish put an end to them in the Americas, and the Incas were doing the same thing. The Incas actually were involved in child sacrifice too. And so over in the time of Moses, all the cultures surrounding them were practicing human sacrifice. But again, that may reflect a form of evolution, because ultimately the Romans lived a pagan way of thinking, but they evolved to the point where not only did they not do human sacrifice, coming to a point where they didn't, although we see evidence of Pilate getting involved in human sacrifice, they put an end to it in every nation they conquered, probably after the death and resurrection of Jesus, probably when you're talking more the time of the Roman Empire, after the time of Jesus. So maybe even during the time of Nero. I'm just guessing that. But you do understand that there is this whole deep wisdom. And what is the wisdom based on? It's based on justice. Now, there are certain things you will see, for example, in Leviticus, which is part of the Torah, these laws that are incredibly stupid to our naming. But then again, you have to realize the time. And there were people that maybe needed to understand this and hear this. But you clearly see that those laws no longer apply in the time of Paul. You can clearly see that. Maybe the most drastic example is you hear this come out every so often. You know, it says right there in Leviticus. I don't know why I'm doing a southern accent. It says, well, I'm going to use another accent. Well, you know, Father, it says right there in Leviticus. Well, that's a southern accent again. That, you know, if you got two guys laying like they were man and woman, they ought to be stoned. Okay, that's Leviticus. But Paul cites that exact situation and does not call for these people to be stoned to death. And when he does call for someone to suffer for their sinful actions, he calls them to be cast to Satan. So the prescripts of the book of Leviticus are past. They no longer apply. And instead, what you have, since the law is written on our hearts, you have a different attitude towards how you deal with these situations. But the act of executing people is out. And that's from St. Paul. So you can see, and that's part of this evolution as well. But you have to understand, as stark as it may seem in the book of Leviticus, the world around Leviticus would be even more stark. And that's the fascinating thing. A good principle, I've told you this before, but I'll bring it up again. In the rule of St. Benedict, which comes from, I think, around the 300s or 400s, I just don't have the figures of St. Benedict right in front of me. Maybe we can go back to Copilot from Bing. Let's see what Copilot from Bing says. When did St. Benedict live? Okay, because he founded the whole monastery system and the rule. 480 to 547 BC. So we're AD. I'm sorry. So we're talking 5th to the 6th century. And he created the monastery system. And one of the things he had was his rule, the Benedictine rule. One of the things it says in the rule is to punish a wayward monk, you are to give them 30 lashes. And when we were in the seminary studying this, I'm going, this is barbaric. What? This is crazy. And the teacher explained to us, no, it's actually not. 30 lashes may sound to us barbaric, but to the time of St. Benedict, it would have been more merciful than what they were doing outside the monastery. So you can see that's why. And my granduncle, was a Trappist monk, which is a form of monastery living that originates from St. Benedict, but obviously it's actually stricter, but within the context of, at that point, the 20th century. And the way they they punished somebody then, instead of giving them whipping, which is from the 6th century, they would force them to maybe be in silence in the chapel, maybe even prostrate in the chapel. I always want to make sure you always want to make sure you get that word correct. They are prostrate, not prostate. You have a problem with your prostate gland, not your prostrate gland. That's how you remember. And so they would be prostrate in the chapel for maybe a whole night or something like that. That was a form of punishment, as opposed to whipping somebody, which was the 6th century. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. Remember to subscribe, comment, like. We'll be right back. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we've been talking about that whole thing about the book of Deuteronomy and all the realities that came from the Torah, and we were just talking about evolution, the whole system, that when we understand evolution, we understand not necessarily just biological evolution, but there's all forms of evolution that all create different systems. And so we understand that part of our faith is realizing that it is, our faith counts within time. That if you really look at what happens with our faith, we understand that it develops over time. This is one of the fascinating things that came from St. John Henry Newman, that there was a belief of development of doctrine. And we can see that. And this is one of the problems. There's an exorcist out there who many people don't understand what he teaches because he's not teaching good stuff. But I don't like exorcists anyway. But if you look carefully what he's teaching that people have to believe the way they believed in the 16th century. If you really, he doesn't say that. You just look at what he says. He's teaching people geocentrism, which is the sun revolves around the earth, which is among the things that you will find in the 16th century. And he teaches other things. He teaches devils. Devils want people to believe in evolution. Really, he's speaking like we are living in the 16th century. Well, why would he be thinking like that? Because he doesn't believe in development of doctrine, and he's going to make statements that don't make any scientific point of sense, because he doesn't believe that people have changed their existence after the 16th century. This is a problem. This is a certain form of fundamentalism that needs to be eliminated from the church. But there are people that embrace this and, this is wonderful, this is great. Because what do they want? They want a static understanding of what we believe. But that is not possible, because the whole focus of our belief is deepening our beliefs. And as I make that illustration all the time, a great example, I give one form of illustration, but I'll give you another one. A great example is Aristotle. Aristotle believed in atoms, but he believed atoms were consistent of, an atom was a mini earth, what was it? Was it the earth, water, fire, and what was the other thing? Earth, water, fire. I don't know what the other thing. Air. They were atoms. He believed in that. Strangely enough, that's fascinating because that is 200. He lived 200 years, 300 years before Christ. So he believed in atoms. He was one of the first to say there are these things called atoms. He had no concept of protons or neutrons and the electronic values and everything else, but he did believe that there were atoms, and the atoms were made of elements. We got the word elements from him, and they were sun. Wait a minute, earth. Well, let me see if I get this right. It's very simple. Fire, water, earth, and air. And each one of these atoms was just a mini bit of fire or water or earth or air. And these created all things. So he had a lot of that done. But if we lived by his science, we'd be crazy. Or my favorite example, my absolute favorite example is the Copernican revolution. The Copernican revolution was discovering that it is the earth that revolves around the sun and not the sun that revolves around the earth. A powerful revolution that was so intense that 200 years later, people are saying, obviously it's not 200 years later for us because this happened again in the 16th century. 200 years later, which is people in the 1700s, people are just starting to come to terms with the fact that, in fact, Copernicus was right, that it is the earth that revolves around the sun, not the sun around the earth. Now it's something we teach in kindergarten. But understanding that reality, people came to an understanding that this is the way the world really is. The world never changed. And that's part of the issue. The world never changed. And that's the important thing to always keep in mind. So in the same way, we say, well, God doesn't change. So we have to realize that God doesn't change. No, but our understanding of God changes. So God doesn't change, but our understanding of God changes. Our understanding of God deepens. And because of that, it would appear to us that our understanding that God changes, but he doesn't. Our understanding of God does change. Our understanding of the universe does change. Our understanding of the earth does change. That's the reality. I remember, now I don't know if this is true, fascinating story. See, I was a sonar technician in the Navy. And being a sonar technician was fascinating, not only working on the system and everything, but among the things I worked on was the fathometer. And like, for example, I can tell you that Japan and Hawaii, two places I visited, are actually at the tops of mountains. So, for example, as we were pulling out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and we'd have the fathometer, and the fathometer would show us that how the water was getting deeper and deeper. So you'd see, this like a slope. So, as you're going, you'd go like a slope, and you'd see this through the sonar system, you'd see that the water was getting deeper, that we seemed to be, well, the way it would appear to us is that we were level, but the earth underneath the water was sloping down. And then all of a sudden, nothing. All of a sudden, there was no return on your pings. Because what you actually have is, if you think of it this way, Hawaii is at the top of Hawaii is a plateau. It's at the top of a mountain, and when you reach the end of that plateau, you've got some kind of intense cliff that's there. So that's what comes up on the sonar. Well, you might visit Hawaii and say, well, this is an island, and it's this floating lily pad, because you don't know what an island is. And then, through later developing and understanding how science works and how the world is, then you come to realize that what Hawaii actually is a series of, the islands are a series of plateaus on a mountain range. That's actually what Hawaii is. Japan is the same way. We'd be pulling out of Japan, Yokosuka, Japan, and we see the water, same thing. The water, it would appear the way that we were going level, but the ocean bottom was just sloping down until finally nothing. You realize that you are on top of a plateau, and then there is some kind of cliff. That's what Japan is. But you learn that over the millennia, people learned that, and they came to understand, oh, this isn't just this floating lily pad of rock, it's the top of a mountain. So Japan, the land that we now call Japan, never changed, but our understanding of that land changed. God doesn't change, our understanding of God changes. And so as we look at the scriptures today, we're going to see a deeper understanding of the scriptures than they did, we'll say, in the time of Moses. But at the same time, we're also understanding that God is infusing his wisdom into the people who otherwise would have to go through the evolutionary system. And in the meantime, they would have engaged in all kinds of bizarre practices because they never learned the mystery and the wisdom of God. And at the same time, you learn this wisdom, and what is this wisdom built on? Love and justice. Love is doing what you want the other person to experience that is good for them, and justice is making sure getting what their due is. But in all the other countries, the whole understanding of justice and love is very different, and we're looking at this wisdom from God. Kind of like, and a good example of this, I think, when I was in South America a long time ago, this is back in the 80s or 90s, if you got, fortunately I never did this, I explained this to you before, if you got stopped by a cop, you'd hand him your license with about 20 pesos. You were bribing the cop because they were paid so little, that's how they made their money. Completely unjust, completely unloving, but that's what we did because that's how that society worked. Now, I didn't do that, but that's how it was done because that's how it's done without wisdom. We'll be right back right after this. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. And again, we are looking at what's coming up tomorrow. And tomorrow is going to be another interesting reading, as this all is at this time. We're going to be in Jeremiah. And we're going to look at Jeremiah 7, where you're going to see the whole idea of people have been given the wisdom, but the question is, do they follow that wisdom? We'll talk about that tomorrow as we understand and we continue to walk through Lent and see these powerful readings, these powerful first readings. And you notice I don't go do the gospel. Why don't I do the gospel? The answer is simple. everyone hears the gospel all the time. And a lot of times you'll hear the first reading or the second reading, will say, oh, that's nice, but and then we'll hear the homilies all about the gospel. I like to focus on the first reading because it really helps to give us this whole highlight that helps us to understand more the gospels, but I do these first readings. And again, it's all this history that is fascinating because as we looked at today, the whole story of Moses, God speaking to Moses as he is preparing the people to enter the promised land. And why doesn't he go into the promised land? Because of the whole thing at Meribah and Massa and Meribah. And so Moses never makes it into the promised land. But tomorrow we're going to be talking about Jeremiah 7. In the meantime, have yourself a blessed day, and we will see you then. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.